the impact of managerial decisions on stock prices. His research has been published, has been nominated for the Best Article Award at the School of Business. He has been publishing articles in the top journals. He has published over 70 articles in the journals like Journal of Financial Economics, Journal of Financial and Quantitative Analysis, Financial Management, Journal of Banking and Finance, Journal of International Money and Finance, European Financial Management, and Journal of Financial Research, Journal of Financial Services Research, Journal of Risk and Insurance. So I think in top journal, including many articles in the real estate field. Professor Ghosh actually has a close link with Indian Institute of Management. He was at IIM Kolkata, and he has some link over the last 6 or 7 months with the Mr. Center at IIMA. We have been talking about collaborative research with him. And those of you who are not familiar with the center, just to give you in a couple of minutes about the center activities. Mr. Center for Financial Markets and Economy is kind of one of the new center at IIMA. And the idea of the center is to bring together the infrastructure, both in terms of human, what I mean in that sense that to bring together researcher, postdoc fellows, faculty, PhD students, and along with that, would like to bring data which are necessary to undertake practical research and on financial markets and economy that would address issues relating to formulation of policy, market structure, regulation, that includes monetary policy, fiscal policy, research relating to banking, real estate, bond market, SME financing. I think whole lot of research ideas we are currently pursuing under this center. Those who are researcher and joining today's webinar, I would request them to take advantage of the center activities. If you would like to participate, just write to us. We'll be very happy to connect you with faculty, interested faculty, as well as we can organize data which are necessary for research. With this brief, I think, background, I would now hand it over to Prashant. Prashant will be taking over the entire webinar. And before that, again, I welcome Professor Chinmay Ghosh. Welcome to IIMA and welcome for this webinar. Thank you very much for your time. I hand it over to Chinmay. Prashant. Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am your host for today. My name is Prashant Das. I'm an associate professor in the finance and accounting area, specializing in real estate. And that is precisely why I'm particularly very excited about bringing Dr. Chinmay Ghosh, because as a PhD student, I had read so many of his papers, and I used to think that he's a pure play real estate professor. Pleasantly surprised, just in a couple of months, I realized that he actually wears 2 hats. And as Abhiman just described, Dr. Ghosh is as prolific in general finance as he is in real estate. Of course, I'm more aware of his real estate research. He has won numerous research awards, and he has advised leading financial institutions such as Fidelity Investments, Prudential, Cigna, IBM Global Finance, you name it. In recent years, the issue of pay ratio has gained substantial traction in social discourse as well as news coverage. The Dodd-Frank Act mandated companies to disclose the median compensation amount of the company's workforce, and then they had to compare that number to the company's CEO compensation amount in the form of a ratio. And you can look up these ratios for thousands of companies. And the fun part is that this ratio varies between 1:1 to 1:a few thousands. So today, Dr. Ghosh will present his research titled Strategic Pay Ratio Estimation Under Social Pressure. We expect the presentation to complete in around 50 to 60 minutes. This will be followed by a Q&A session for interaction. We sincerely hope that you will interact. If you have questions, feel free to ask. sometimes it may be more optimal for me to pose the question directly to Chinmoy, or maybe I will take a note of your questions and then I will pose those questions when we believe it's more appropriate. Before this presentation starts, I have to announce the next one also. Our next webinar in this series is scheduled on Wednesday, the 16th June at the same time. Dr. Patrick Smith from San Diego State University will be presenting his research on mortgage securitization and asset liquidation. We will post the announcements with the complete details soon. Right now, we are eagerly waiting to hear from Dr. Chinmoy Ghosh. So Chinmoy, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Prashant, and thank you, Aviman. I can say good morning because it's about a little after 9:30 at United States, and I'm sitting in my home office, as you can imagine, because we haven't been to our offices for more than a year. It's a virtual lockdown. I have visited my office only about 2 or 3 times, but only for 15 minutes. And even for that, I need permission from the provost office. So we are in virtual lockdown in the United States, all over the country. The issue is the same. But the good news is that seems like the monster is under control. I am deeply concerned about what's happening to my family and friends in India. We are keeping track. And if I had time, I would tell you how many family members and friends I have lost. So I am deeply concerned and deeply sympathetic to the pains and suffering that my country people are going through. But life has to go on, and I appreciate this opportunity. And as Prashant and Aviman said, I'll tell you a little bit about my background, because it is true that I straddle both real estate and corporate finance, but there is a common theme there, in the sense that almost all of my real estate papers have some corporate finance link to them. And if you look at my resume, you will see that the first few years of my career, it was almost entirely corporate finance. We have a very active research center at University of Connecticut, which is one of the oldest research centers in the world. And around 1993-94, immediately after I was tenured, the dean and the center director at that time invited me to a lunch and said that we would like you to work in real estate. And I said, I know nothing about real estate and I have no interest at all. That's when this guy, who Prashant must have heard of, and I'm very proud to be his collaborator on many, many papers, Ceop Sermons, arguably the top academic in real estate. He was the director, and he said, Chinmoy, I know real estate and you know corporate finance. Let's bring those two streams of literature together. And that partnership produced a series of papers. And CF was with us for 17 years after that. And the partnership was extremely beneficial. And we were both very productive. We had a lot of PhD students. But after CF left UConn, he went to Florida State, and he has just retired. I started to shift back to corporate finance. So if you look at my resume now, you will see that there is a lot of corporate finance work that I'm doing right now. And as Prashant said, I have collaboration going on with definitely IIM Calcutta. I'm working with a couple of faculty members there. I'm Raipur also. I have some link. Indore, there is a project going on. So I am active with my collaborators in India, and I'm definitely excited about the center at IIM Ahmedabad. And Prashant, Aviman, and myself, we are hopeful that in the next 2-3 years, we will be able to generate some papers in real estate. So I'm quite familiar with the research environment in India. And if time permits, I'll tell you or talk to you about how I perceive both the challenges as well as the opportunities in India. I think the challenges you all know, there is no question about it. And I feel that when I work with my co-authors, I feel that. But I will also talk about the opportunities, that there are definite opportunities. Once again, I'm grateful for this opportunity. IIM Ahmedabad is definitely one of the top institutes. I'm from IIM Calcutta. So when I was going through the IIM, which one is ranked higher was always a controversy. In my mind, it is still a controversy, but that really doesn't matter. But I will simply say that my class in IIM Calcutta produced possibly one of the top 5 alums in the world. And that's Indra Nui, the CEO of Pepsi, who just stepped down a couple of years ago, was my classmate. I'm very proud, although the heights that she has achieved, I am nowhere near that, but I feel very proud, and she's a very modest woman. With that introduction, let me talk about the issue at hand. And as Prashant said, CEO pay is always a controversial topic because there is always this notion that the CEO is overpaid. Michael Jensen said about 40 years ago, that depends on the perspective. That if you look at a CEO pay, you must look at how much value he is generating. Meaning that you will see that in terms of the value that the CEO is generating, when I say value, I mean shareholder value, and obviously the best way to measure that is stock price, that you will see that most CEOs that are so highly paid are only paid a small fraction of the value they are generating. Now, whether the CEO is directly responsible for generating this value can be debated. But what in my mind cannot be or should not be debated is not what the CEO has contributed. But the question is that, can the CEO mess up things? And we know that yes. And without being political, I will give you an analogy that I always felt that in the United States, who the president is does not make a difference until we got a president who did make a difference. Now, I'm not going to say whether the difference was good or bad, because that's a matter of personal judgment, but we know that he made a difference, and you know who I am talking about. He made a difference in the United States as well as across the world. Things are not as exciting anymore now that he's no longer the president. News is not as exciting as it used to be. That's the point I'm trying to make, that it's not a question of whether he was a good or bad person or good or bad manager, but the point is that he did make his presence felt. Whether good or bad is personal judgment. I'm not going to get into that. So the point here is that the CEO can make a difference. But it is still very difficult to rationalize if you think about a news article that appeared in New York Times about a month ago, that does it make any sense for the CEO to be making $140 million a year? Does anybody make that much? Of course. But if you look at the proportion of how much value was generated in that particular year, you will see that that proportion is not that high, meaning that it could be much higher. So the controversy is not so much whether it is contributing, the contribution, the controversy is whether the pay is justified or not. Now, the question of justification is difficult to establish. So there are two ways that you can look at the pay. One is the absolute pay. But the profession, as well as the academic, as well as the practicing world, has looked at it from many different perspectives. It's not just the absolute pay. Some have looked at it, you may be familiar with the concept of CEO pay gap, where you look at the CEO pay and you look at the pay of the next 5 or 6 top officers. And then you look at the difference in the pay and you say, this is the CEO pay gap. That's one way of looking at it. Then another way that has been looked at is CEO pay slice. That means that you look at the total pay of all of the top officers and see how much of that is going to the CEO. All of these have been used in academic papers. I have a paper that is work in progress right now on CEO pay gap, but this paper is slightly different. Here we are talking about the pay ratio. That means take the CEO pay and divide that by the pay of the median employee. I mean, on the face of it, it looks very simple. And if you think about it, it is very, very simple. But as Prashant said, this particular number now must be reported. And you must report three things, as I will get into the middle of the paper. I will show you. I'm just trying to give you the story of the paper, because each paper, I think, is a story. And how good the paper is depends on how well you have been able to articulate the story. These days, at least in corporate finance, all of you must be aware of this, that the rejection rate is tremendously high. I have had papers rejected at Journal of Financial Economics and Review of Financial Studies in less than a day, meaning that I submit at 11 o'clock in the morning, I get the rejection at 2 o'clock. Imagine the consternation, because you have worked on this paper for about 3.5 years, and then the editor writes back and saying, this paper is a very poor fit. We have not submitted this paper yet. That's the only good news about this paper, that it hasn't been rejected. But the reason it has been rejected is because it hasn't been submitted. As soon as we submit, I'm sure that it will go on for some time. In any case, the pay ratio is the ratio, as I said, of the CEO pay divided by the median pay of the median employee. And this is now something that the companies must report. So why is this important? For two things. One, actually, unlike what Prashant said, SEC tells the world CEO pay ratio is not comparable. That means you should not be comparing the pay ratio of Apple to another company, let's say in a similar industry, let's say Microsoft. Now, that might seem to be something strange, because you would like to compare the ratios and you would like to comment on which particular ratio is high or low. But SEC says do not compare the ratios across companies. But there is a reason as to why they say so. It is because the calculation may be simple, but SEC gave the companies a lot of discretion with respect to how you choose the median employee. And the choice of the median employee is a discretionary item, because SEC also allows the companies to choose which items to be included in the calculation of the pay. So the stipulation is that here are the 5 or 6 items that you can consider, and these items are very common. When I show you the items list, you will see that they are very common, and anybody can name them. For example, salary plus bonus, some plus benefits, plus short-term incentives, plus long-term incentives. These are the 5 or 6 items. But SEC gives you full discretion of which items to be included in the definition of pay, with one stipulation, and that restriction is that you must apply the same method to the calculation of all employees. Seems fine. But you will find out when I present the data that companies have chosen many different methods. So the question is that, okay, and in fact, you will realize that there is a lot of incentive or motivation for choosing the method, because before this particular rule was enacted, there was a lot of lobbying going on with the SEC that give us as much discretion as possible. You might think, why is it that they are so keen on having this discretion? This paper is about that only. In the sense, why is it that companies are so excited or anxious to be able to choose which items to be included? And what we will show with our evidence is that there is a lot of variation across companies as to which method they choose. And what we will establish is that choice apparently has only one purpose, and that is to depress the pay ratio. Now you think about it, that they lobbied so that SEC gives them all of that discretion. SEC's purpose of this ratio was to share as much information as possible with the investment community. But during the lobbying process, they allowed the companies the discretion, and now the companies are using the discretion, which is perfectly legal, by the way, to choose a particular method that will give them the minimum possible pay ratio. That means that they are, in some ways, we are saying that this is an unintended consequence. And what we will show is that that unintended consequence is not random. There is a pattern to it because the social pressure, and we will show you some proxies of how we measure the social pressure the company is operating under. And you will see that the greater the social pressure, more restrictive is the ratio that they are reporting, meaning that they are choosing a method which will give them the lowest possible ratio. So what we are establishing is that the method that the companies are choosing has a direct correlation. We are not saying it is causal or anything, but there is a strong correlation between the method they choose, which will lead to a smaller pay ratio, and that particular choice is influenced by the amount of social pressure the companies face. So the basic finding in this thing is that companies do make decisions based on aspects that are not captured in asset prices, that are not captured in the theories of CEO decision making that we are most familiar with. That this has nothing to do with shareholder valuation maximization or anything at all. This is pure and simple companies catering or yielding to social pressure to artificially depress the pay ratio. So that's the basic premise of the paper. I will get into the paper now. And by the way, my co-authors are Zinat from University of North Texas, Harley Ryan, a friend of mine for a long period of time, very established name in corporate finance, and my colleague Ling Wan. Ling is in our department and a junior faculty member. And she joined UConn about 7 years ago. Before that, she was at Tulane University for a few years.
So switch to slideshow mode, please.
Yes, of course. Let me see, because it is covered now. I cannot do that. Sorry.
No, this is okay.
But let me see why that is. You see what is happening is that the pictures are now at the bottom and I cannot move the picture. So let me go like this. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Okay, so we use the CEO pay ratio disclosure rule. This is definitely mandatory now, and to examine if the firms make strategic choices, and they do, to estimate pay ratios that more closely conform to pro-social attitudes. That's the basic purpose. So CEO pay ratio is CEO pay over median employee pay. Firm has little discretion over how they calculate the CEO. I mean, this is a pure ratio. So if you really want to depress the ratio, you might say, well, I mean, depress the numerator. You can't do that. You can't cut CEO pay. Of course not. On the other hand, you might say, well, I mean, then work on the denominator. Pay people more. That's too costly. The companies really will not touch the numerator or the denominator, which will directly change the pay ratio. They might do something with respect to how much they are paying the CEO in which pocket. They might do that. Some companies have done that. Change keep the total the same, but change the different components of it so that then they choose the components so that the pay ratio will be depressed. They can do all of that, but they cannot. They simply will not be able to cut the total pay, nor do they want to increase the pay of the median employees. Now, also remember, when I say median employees, basically what I mean is that you prepare, following a particular method, a list of all of your employees and their pay. Then you take the median number. So there might be something going on with respect to who should be included. And then maybe companies will outsource some of the job and basically get rid of some of the people that are in the bottom of the rank. And some companies do that, but remember, those are also not going to be easy to do because the union may come in and say that, no, you are not going to be allowed to do that. So the discretion that the company has is not so much with respect to the actual pay. The discretion they had is actually in terms of choosing the method. And we'll show you that that's what they have been doing. Here is our research question. That we are looking at the social pressure. And how do we determine that? We look at the company headquarters. That whether the headquarters is in a state with a stronger pro-social culture, And there are set measures and proxies of how pro-social a particular state is. Toward income inequality, use their discretion. So if you are headquartered in a state that is highly pro-social in its political climate, in its attitude to people and all that, then you will see that income inequality is an issue, and those companies use their discretion to use consistently applied compensation method. That's the method I was talking about. That's the technical name, CSCM, to lower their reported CEO pay ratios. Now, before I proceed further, notice that the word reported is in italics and underlined. That means that this is the number that the CEO or the company has reported to SEC, which must be in your annual statement. Now, if you calculate the number, given some data that you may have access to, you may come up with a different number totally. That's possible. Because you see, the CEO pay, you may be able to come up with the same number, but the denominator is something that there may be a lot of different choices. So that we are talking about the reported number. What's the motivation? I will cut on the the literature review, because that's not basically our work. Who cares about that? But we need to position the paper. So positioning the paper is very, very important. And we have positioned the paper in basically the literature which talks about the social culture in which the companies operate. Culture can be a significant determinant. Now, let me point out that we haven't submitted the paper. For all you know, the editor may say, I don't want a paper on culture. Forget it. It's not finance. It could happen. In any case, that's where we have positioned the paper. And all of these papers that I am actually citing are in top finance journals or finance journals. There are 2 or 3 that are highly cited. Ahern's paper is highly cited. Those of you that work in the international mergers area must have seen Ahern's paper. Nguyen also highly cited paper. Then we have pro-social concern about income inequality has created negative public sentiment. That has been established. That means that there is sufficient in the literature to actually, for us to go in and say that companies do pay attention to income inequality has been established by showing that society cares about it. Then the evidence also suggests that firms do act as if they care about public perception. Compensation design has been modified, and they are more likely to replace CEOs after negative ESG. You all know there is a lot of motivation on ESG. I have a paper that I'm working on ESG related news. So there is a lot of motivation of this particular topic in the finance literature now. That in other settings, that firms respond to economic incentives and use discretionary choices. So the point here is the following, that are companies making decisions and choices that are basically for the mandatory disclosures to look better? What are mandatory disclosures? I mean, earnings per share is definitely one of them. And you know that there is a very large literature on earnings management, earnings restatements. So the point we are trying to make is that there is ample evidence in the literature that the management does adjust their decision-making to respond to make discretionary choices so that things look better to outsiders. And obviously, there cannot be more controversial something than the CEO pay. And we know that there is a lot of controversy, lot of criticism of that. So if firms headquartered in more pro-social states anticipate net benefits from reporting a smaller ratio, they have incentives to decrease CEO pay, increase the pay of the median employee, or use their discretion to estimate a lower reported pay ratio. Of these 3 choices, obviously, first 2 are not going to be optimal. So they will definitely do third one, and that's what this our paper is about. So what are the effects of higher CEO pay? One is that attract the attention of general public, and that attention is going to be negative. Signal weak governance. That means that you cannot control the CEO. The CEO is too powerful. lead to surtaxes on farms. And this is a definite cost. Most of the Western states now, most of the states in the West Coast and East Coast, including states like Oregon, Washington, California, New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut, all of these, as you know, are considered to be quote unquote liberal states where there is a lot of attention of CEO pay. And some of them have either already passed or proposed surtaxes on companies that have CEO pay ratios in excess of a particular threshold. So that's a direct cost. For example, Portland city, which is the capital city of Oregon, the West Coast state, has a 10% surcharge if the CEO pay ratio exceeds 100, and a 25% surtax if the CEO pay ratio exceeds 250. So there is a definite cost there. Then there has been studies that have shown that high CEO pay ratios cause lower employee morale and higher employee turnover. Now, one thing that you might say that, well, we know that there are some benefits to CEO pay. What are the benefits? Obviously, the CEO pay, higher the CEO pay, the higher is the CEO incentive. And as some of you may know, that one of the theories for CEO pay gap, where pay gap is defined as the CEO pay minus the pay of the next 5 senior officers, there is a theory which says that the higher that pay or pay gap, more motivated are the next group of officers to succeed the CEO. So they will work more, put in more effort, to maybe take more risky projects, which will boost shareholder wealth. So there are some benefits. But remember that here we are not talking about a pay gap per se. We are strictly talking about a pay ratio between the CEO and the median employee. So there is a difference between these two. Here is the mandate that the firms must disclose the pay ratio, disclose the median in annual compensation of employees, disclose the annual total compensation of the CEO, and then the ratio. Of these 3 or 4, the CEO total compensation is something that companies used to do for a long period of time. What they did not do is the compensation of the median employee. So that's the new addition from 2017. Disclosure provides new data. That was the rationale for investors to better understand compensation policy. And the reality of this thing is that media and public often compare across firms. This is the point where I said that most people would think that you should be comparing the ratios, and most people do. But SEC said, do not compare. And if you think about it, the reason that they are suggesting that do not compare, because Apple and Microsoft may be choosing totally different methods, and it is perfectly legal for them to do so, which is why they say do not compare. But in reality, people do compare. Okay, now we are actually getting into what are the different steps in the pay ratio disclosure process. How am I doing with respect to time, Prasant?
We have around 15 minutes, but we have a couple of questions, clarificatory questions.
Okay, so I will speed up a little so that I don't miss the main results. So this is important, that when you calculate the pay ratio, remember the focus is mainly on choosing the median employee, how you choose the median employee. One is by statistical sampling. That means that you really basically put in all of the data and let the computer do the work for you. But in that, there are certain things that you can do. One is de minimis exemption, meaning that if your number of employees in foreign countries exceeds 5%, you may exclude them. Then foreign data privacy exemptions. That means that India may actually have some stipulation that the pay that you are, that the amount you are paying to your employees in India for various reasons, maybe political reasons, cannot be disclosed. Then M&A exemptions, meaning that if there has been an M&A, then new employees may have joined the company, which you may actually exclude. And then the decision is that you calculate the compensation for each of the included employees. So the top 4 or 5 is how you can actually determine which employees will be included in your calculation. After you do that, you will have to use a consistently applied CSCM. Consistently means that the same method must be applied to everybody else. Apply cost of living adjustments if you want to. Step 2, estimate the total pay of the identified median employee. Step 3 is calculate the pay ratio. And step 4 is that draft the pay ratio disclosure. Now there, as I said, you report the total pay, you report that of the CEO, report the total pay of the median employee and the pay ratio. Then you supply the details of the estimation method, apply different discussion styles, meaning that, there are papers on this particular topic which have shown that the companies are choosing language which are basically motivated by the tone that they want to actually share with the market. We don't focus on the language or the tone aspect of it. Then supplemental discussions, do not compare discussions. Meaning that they will say that please do not compare our number with others, and supplemental ratio discussions. What some companies will do in order to look fair to the outside market, where the market may actually be suspecting that your pay ratio doesn't really make sense to us, they calculate supplemental ratios also. And remember, the more supplemental ratios that you report, more suspicion that there must be something going on. So there are a lot of different motivations that we see with respect to how the company is reporting this. And this is basically repetition, that step 1. So you go through those steps to identify the median employee. So this is all identifying the median employee. Then we said, okay, let us now see what are the different methods that the company can choose. Number 1 method, of course, is the simplest one, salary. Number 2 is cash compensation, all of salary plus cash received, including bonus. Complexity rank 3 is benefits, health and life insurance. Complexity rank 4 is the total compensation. That means that you include all of the items. Now you realize that the more complex the rank, the longer it will take to calculate. But in the process, you may actually be able to manipulate the ratio. So what we do is that we see what is the ratio of the company and which particular rank they have chosen, and whether there is a correlation between the two. So in our data, 13.4% of the companies chose salary only, meaning rank 1. Then cash compensation is 63%. Cash compensation plus is about 16%, and total compensation is 8%. Now you realize that if minimization of cost was their only objective, most of them should have chosen salary only, but they don't. So here are the items that you can include. 1 is salary, 2 cash compensation, then equity incentives, then retirement benefits, other benefits, and then the total. So first, I will show you the result. Now we actually do the rank 2 ways. One is, as I just showed you, and then we also come up with a ranking using the principal component analysis of those 5 components that I showed you. And then we use that ranking to run a regression between the method you have chosen and the pay ratio. Here is the sample of the data. That use the Java natural language processing, 7,389. Now, as I told you that they're doing some research like this in India can be very challenging. I will tell you why. Because notice that we have only 2 years of data, 2017 and 18, because this project started around the summer of 2019. And remember, we are sitting here on the summer of 2021, and the paper is not even ready yet for submission. That is because the first 1 year, the whole year, was with the vendor, where the vendor actually did all of the work for us to extract the information from the annual statements. That was a $40,000 job just to get the data. which is why I said that I still know the exchange rate, so I know how much $40,000 will translate to. In any case, that puts a huge barrier in front of some people in India who want to do research like that. So it's not always a matter of not having the topic or anything. I think that you all know the topics, but getting the data could be a big barrier. In any case, most of the data here was collected by a vendor, and most of the analysis with respect to, there is a lot of programming with respect to textual analysis. All of that was done for us by the vendor, and it took us about 6 to 8 months. Then you use computer code to extract pay ratio, CEO pay and median employee pay for approximately 90% of the sample. At the end, we have 2,678 unique firms in 2017 and 2018. Now is a proxies for pro-social culture. Remember, there are two different sort of parts of this project. The first part is where we calculate the pay ratio, and we see which particular method they chose to calculate the pay ratio. And then we try to determine as to whether there is a relation between the two. That means that is the CSEM choice in some way influencing the pay ratio, and we see that there is a strong correlation. Then we ask that, okay, now that we have established that they are choosing the method, the question is why? Why are they choosing the method? Why are they so keen and spending so much time and resources to choose a particular method? That's where the stage 2 or phase 2 of the project, where we look at, is the company under social pressure? And what type of social pressure? That's where these proxies come in, and we check as to whether the social pressure that the company is operating in has anything to do with their choice of the method. Number one is, what is the minimum age in the state? Notice that these are all measures of how liberal or how liberal leaning the state is. The more liberal leaning the state is, the higher is the social pressure. Minimum wage attitude, state tax differential. The higher the state tax differential, the less liberal is the state. And then democratic leaning. So we looked at state level fraction of votes for Hillary Clinton. Then whether there is a pay ratio surtax. I mentioned that to you, that the first state that to do that was Oregon. Then union coverage. How many employees in the state are covered by the union? And then union membership, also percentage of wage and salary workers that are actually union members. So the point here is that these are all proxies to represent the pro-social culture in the state. Then we do the two stage. Number one, stage one is examine the relation between reported pay ratio. Remember, it is the reported pay ratio in the annual statement. That means that everybody sees the same number, and the complexity of the method. Now, I should point out that the complexity of the method that we use in this particular paper is a real contribution, because there is nothing in the SEC document or anything that any company is using where they will say that this is the method we have used. So if and when we get the paper published or accepted, we are hoping that there is going to be a lot of attention from practitioners as well as from SEC with respect to the method that we have developed in this particular paper. That's the stage one. Stage two is estimate an empirical trade-off model for the cost of implementing the CSEM, and I went through the costs. The costs are almost all social, and the proxies for the pro-social culture in the headquarters state. Let me take you to the results. Notice that this is a relation between pay ratio and CSEM complexity. Strongly negative coefficient, and what that negative coefficient really means is that companies are choosing more complex methods to lower their pay ratios. And this is very strong evidence in the data that the more complicated the method, lower is the pay ratio. Now realize that companies have full discretion here. That means the method is a choice. And the outcome is the pay ratio. And what we see is that there is a strong negative relation between the choice, higher the ranking, lower the ratio. And because this is a discretionary choice, this is a managerial decision. So that's the first stage result, very, very strong. We have all kinds of control variables and other fixed effects and all that. That's all built in there. And I'm going to skip that in the interest of time. Here is the pro-social. Yeah.
Sorry, Chinmoy. In the previous model, is it pooled regression? Is it because for 2 years you can't possibly run a fixed effect, right?
Yeah.
So, and because we cannot compare across different.
It is. Yeah, it is a pooled regression. Yes.
It's a pooled regression. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. And this is the second stage: pro-social environment and the CSEM complexity. Headquarter state pro-social score. Now, I showed you what are the different proxies we are using for pro-social. This pro-social score is already in existence in the literature on another paper, on competing paper. And we have taken their model, did some modification on it, and created this pro-social score. And the point here is that the higher the score, the more complex is the method they are choosing. That means that they are the more liberal sort of the state, more complex is the choice of the method. Now remember, more complex choice means that the pay ratio will be lower. So there is a link from the method to the pay ratio through the pro-social score. Now this is a path analysis. And notice that headquarter pro-social score is basically the guiding factor here. That tells us how liberal or pro-social the state is. That determines the choice of the CSEM complexity. I should not say determine, sort of influence. And then that leads to the output, which is the pay ratio. And each arm is very statistically significant. So there is a strong relationship between stage 1 and strong relationship in stage 2, and there is an indirect effect also. So this is with the pro-social score. Next, we do the union coverage. That okay, let us look at the union coverage as to how the union coverage is influencing their choice of the method, and we see the same thing. That the stronger the union presence in the state, the higher is the complexity rank they are choosing. And obviously that leads to the lower pay ratio. Same thing here. This is the path analysis also. Path analysis is something that we have added in this paper, which is beginning to show up in finance papers. But we feel that this does put the paper in a very good position in the sense that it shows the link between the 3 different stages. This is the headquarter state with pay ratio surtax. So this is basically a dummy variable for the 7 or 8 states where the surtax has either already been enacted or being proposed. And we see that, yes, that has a huge impact. That is also statistically significant, meaning that if the headquarter happens to be in one of those states, companies are choosing on average more complex method for ranking. Same path analysis here. Here is the robustness check. I'm not going to take too much time for it because I always remember what a top associate editor told me a few years ago in a top journal, that everybody does robustness tests, but nobody says that after the robustness test, our results do not hold. So yes, you must do it, but the results will always hold. And we see the same thing, but we have to do the robustness test. So I'm going to skip that. But now there could be some alternative explanations. These are not really robustness tests. And these are definitely the areas where we can expect that people will be attacking us. That there are always alternative explanations that you can come up with. And we have chosen the ones that make the most sense to us. One is that you change the labor force. That maybe you got rid of some of the people that are at the bottom of the pay scale. We see that labor force actually increased over time. Change into a CEO total pay, it doesn't happen. And actually, it increased over time. Then the question is, are some companies changing the compensation design? Now, this is a very subtle move in the sense that realize that what you are choosing are the different components. So if you change the composition of the CEO pay, that will give you sufficient discretion of changing the total pay also. And we see that some firms may not offer equity compensation, hence they have to resort to simpler method. And we controlled for that. There is nothing there. I mean, the results are still very, very robust. What are the additional determinants? This is important. That, okay, you are saying that the companies are responding to the social pressure, but there may be something else going on, in the sense that companies may be changing the CEO total pay based on say on pay. Now, those of you that are not familiar with say on pay, SOP is that every single year, or I believe it is once every 3 years, shareholders are invited to vote on their perception or opinion of the CEO pay and how the CEO pay has been determined. In fact, recently, AT&T is one of the companies where the shareholders voted down the CEO pay scheme. So say on pay is beginning to be very, very important these days. And there are papers that have been published in finance journals on how say on pay voting affects managerial decisions with respect to CEO pay. Outcomes prior to the disclosure, we controlled for that. Significant and negative association. So yes, it does matter. Then ex-ante expectations of the pay ratio. We look at CEO VP pay ratio. That means that you might actually think that, well, CEO is making a lot of money, but maybe all other managers are too. That means that you should not be looking at just the CEO pay. You should also pay some attention to how much the other senior officers are paying. We control for that. So remember, this is very similar to the argument about the CEO pay gap. So we do in some ways control for the CEO pay gap. Our results are still robust. We do other tests. The other test is, well, did they actually revise the method? Now, this particular change that we see, remember, we have only two years of data. That is simply because when we did the study, more data wasn't available. And if they ask us to add more data, we'll be happy to do so. 19 firms changed their CSCM from 2017 to 2018. Remember, that's a very, very small number, given the number of firms that we have in our sample. 13 firms changed from a simpler CSCM to a more complex CSCM. Now, you realize that moving from simple to more complex basically means that you're doing so to reduce the pay ratio. So, average headquarters state pro-social score, complexity goes up by about 1.179. If the complexity goes up, that's the change they're making. Then the pro-social score, the CEO pay ratio does drop significantly from 196 to 75. That means that there is clear evidence, although small number of firms, that yes, they are making a change in the method they choose to reduce the pay ratio. Let me now talk about the conclusions. We are the first to focus on the estimation method instead of the ratio itself. Now, I should make a comment here that those of you that work on the area of regulation, I have done some papers on regulation. You know that nowadays they're distinguishing between real effects and economic effects. Most of the time, we focus on the economic effects, meaning how has the stock price responded? How have the company performance has been changed? But the real effects is, has management responded in a particular way? So our paper is in the real effect area. And there is a paper written in 2016 in Journal of Accounting Research, where some very established Chicago professors, both accounting professors, are saying that you should be focusing more on the real effects, because otherwise it's like a black box. You are telling us how the stock price moves, but you are not telling us what's causing those stock prices to move and what is the management doing. So our paper is in the area of sort of like the real effects. That means how are companies responding? And the other competing papers are not in that area. So we think that we have a very good niche in this paper. Firms with headquarters in pro-social states appear to strategically choose more complex methods. So yes, companies are responding, definitely. And they're reporting also. But unfortunately, they are responding in a way that artificially depresses the pay ratio, which was not the intent of the SEC at all. Now we are saying that that's why they lobbied. They knew this is what they are going to do. This is the competing paper, Boone et al. They present evidence that firms use spin words. This is Audra Boone, very prolific and very, very competitive, by the way. Her paper, I think, is a little further, maybe a month ahead of us. They show that spin words portray their pay ratio more positively. That means it is not that management has been silent. Management has been using language to create a perception that our pay ratio is not as unfriendly as you think, which, if you think about it, does substantiate the argument we are making, that these people are using the language, spin language, to convince the market that, hey, we are not as bad as you think. But we show that actually they are, because they are depressing the pay ratio by choosing a method within their discretion, of course, which will artificially depress the pay ratio. Results in Pan et al. This is a paper that is also a little ahead of us, maybe a month ahead also, or maybe a month and a half, suggests that pro-social investors react negatively to high CEO pay ratio. I should comment that we have tried to replicate their results, but we failed, meaning that we cannot actually substantiate the claim that they are making in their paper that market reacts negatively. We don't see that. But let me conclude by saying the following. I am a shareholder, as you are. If I asked each one of you, do you really know how much the CEO is making? We have done that survey. Most of the shareholders don't really care. So the point in this thing is that Jensen was right. Shareholders do not care so long as the stock price is increasing. I mean, those of you that hold Google or Facebook know that over the last year or so, the price has doubled, in some cases more than doubled. Do you care as to how much Zuckerberg makes? No. So the point is, it's not because of the shareholders. It is because of the politicians. It is because of the perception that we want to look socially good to the union, to the public, and to the newspaper people, which is why they are manipulating this pay ratio so that it is artificially depressed. So we consider our contribution to be in the literature, which has been growing recently, that companies do respond to the social environment. I'll stop here. Thank you very much for your patience and your patient hearing. Paper is still work in progress, so all questions are most welcome. You have my email these days. Tracking people down is very easy. Just go to Google and put my name. You will get my email, and any response is most welcome. Paper is not ready for distribution right now because we are making some final changes, but should be ready for distribution very soon. Thank you very much. Thank you, Prashant, and thank you, Viman.
Thank you very much, Chinmoy. We have scheduled some time for Q&A. This was a very intriguing study indeed, not only rigorous, but it also touches upon a rather controversial topic which has been talked about. And you address it from many different angles. I'm sure there are people who have feedback and suggestions, but I will ask you to quickly answer some clarificatory questions that some of the attendees have asked. Shubham is asking, what kind of social pressures are we considering here? And I guess you have already described it, but how do you measure social pressure? I think that is what he's interested in. If you could
well, you know, that's a very good question in the sense that in some ways, as you can tell, that is intangible. So we have used proxies, and these proxies are established proxies. For example, there is something called a pro-social score for each state. We did not actually develop it. It was already in existence, and we tweaked it a little. And basically, that score is some kind of a principal component analysis of the different proxies that I showed you. For example, you know, what is the minimum wage in the state? what is the attitude to the minimum wage. For example, that some states, like if you take Texas, okay, and as you know, this is a highly controversial thing that is going on in the country right now, where they are counting and counting and counting again and again and again the same votes in Arizona, in Georgia. So the question is that why is it that that is happening in those states and not happening in Connecticut or New York? That should tell you that the attitude in these two states are different. So obviously we could say that the particular states where the counting is going on are possibly not as pro-social as New York or Massachusetts. And there is another question also. That question has come up and people just laugh. That the people that are actually saying that you must count the presidential vote in Arizona are reluctant to have their own votes counted because they were actually elected also in the same state at the same time in the legislature. But said, no, there was no controversy there. So the question is that most of these things are nothing but political posturing. So what we are trying to capture by looking at the minimum wage, the attitude towards the minimum wage, the unionization as to what is the political posture of the state. And that's what we use as an index of pro-social. We don't expect too much pushback on that because that's an established score.
Mm-hmm. So I have some suggestions as well, but I will let the panelists' questions come first. Another quick question from Shashank that do we compute the numerator and denominator using same methodology, like same variables?
Yes, must be.
So how about options, for example?
Yes, well, I mean, that is something that is in the long-term incentives and options are included, but some companies may include it, some companies may decide not to. And whatever the companies have done, we have followed that. And the companies tell you that this is the way we have calculated. That only restriction is that you must apply the same method to everybody. But you realize that the CEO may be getting options, the bottom employee may not. So whether the CEO options will be counted or not is a matter of choice for the company. But if they have, then we have also included that in our complexity ranking. One thing I should make clear, that we did not actually calculate the ratio. It is already reported. We did not calculate the CEO pay. It is already reported. What we calculated is the method, the ranking, complexity ranking of the method. We did not calculate the pay ratio. No.
Right. Naresh is asking in terms of value creation around all the stakeholders, which is convenient, higher pay ratio or the comparatively small ratio?
Well, I mean, we don't get into that question because remember, we don't look into, but we have actually done the test. As I said, Pan et al.
Pan et al. Has done that study, right? And you couldn't verify.
I mean, what they show that higher pay ratio induces lower stock prices. That means that there is a negative stock price reaction. We tried many different ways to replicate their test. We just cannot come up with it.
So in a way, Pan et al. Is a bit daring because they are negating what Jensen said, right?
But the paper is extremely well written. Pan is at University of Iowa or Utah, I believe, and she's very well published. You know, I mean, when a paper is working paper, but we think we know where the paper is under review. You have to be careful when you say that we cannot replicate the results. We don't want to say that their results are flawed. All we say that we don't find those results. That's it.
Okay. Chuck from Texas is sending some feedback. Chuck, would you like to unmute yourself and say it yourself? Riddhi, can Chuck be unmuted, please? Charles Thomas.
Yes, I'll.
Okay. Okay. In the meanwhile, does anyone else have any question for Dr. Ghosh? So then I have an opportunity to discuss with you. I was wondering, this paper is, of course, my belief is that you're targeting it towards something like Journal of Financial Economics, which has more appetite for topics like this. And it's of course, a very fascinating topic. But I guess if at all there are vulnerabilities, then they would be in measuring these abstract concepts like social pressure. For example, one could argue that are we oversimplifying political inclination simply by looking at votes to Hillary? And this is why I was trying to bring Chuck in here, because I've had like long discussions with him on this topic. So some people may be socially conservative but economically liberal. So Chuck, please go ahead.
Okay, maybe I'm unmuted now. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Please.
Okay, terrific. Thanks. I thought maybe I'd logged in the wrong way. I'm never quite sure. No, I appreciate your work. It's very interesting, and I think it's probably an important piece of work. A couple of recommendations that I have, really, because of my background is accounting and teaching the accounting area, is that maybe you deepen your tie into the accounting research, the accounting research around managerial choice about accounting disclosures.
Yeah.
And I've not seen anybody do that with the social pressures. Somebody may have. I don't know all the literature in this area, but I think if you could tie it deeper into the accounting research, then you may be able to allay some of the concerns about it not being finance enough.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good comment at this point of time. Let me respond to both you as well as Prashant at the same time. At this point of time, as I said, the paper hasn't been rejected. That is simply because the paper hasn't been submitted. Our objective at this point of time is somehow to get the paper through the door, in the sense, avoid the desk rejection. Because I'm sure you all realize that the desk rejection rate right now at almost all finance journals. By the way, I think that there are no easy finance journals anymore. I have had desk rejections at Financial Management, Journal of Corporate Finance, everywhere. If the first step is to try to avoid a desk rejection. Now, how will I know? I mean, usually it takes we have had desk rejections within an hour to 2 weeks. So what we are hoping is that let us identify the areas which might sort of kill the paper in the first round. And the points that you are making, I think they are very well taken. So what we are hoping is that the editor or the reviewer tells us that, yes, we buy the idea looks good, the results look sound, but there are some alternative measures of social pressure that we would like you to consider.
Yes.
We will be happy to address that at that point of time. Because with respect to the comment about accounting journals, yes, I'm very familiar with that. In fact, I have another paper which is currently under review on CDA document. And those of you that are not familiar with the CDA, a CDA is basically a disclosure document that must be attached or as added or sort of shared with the annual statements, which explains how different pays of the CEO and to the senior officers are justified. And that particular paper does get into a lot of about disclosure issues, also tremendous amount of textual analysis. And what we found, I mean, the paper, to be honest with you, has been rejected at a top finance as well as an accounting journal. And the response is basically the type of comment you are making, that please position the paper more in this kind of literature, which we now have done, and the paper is under review once more. So I think the point you are making is definitely well taken.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for your work.
We have an interesting suggestion, Chinmay, from Ribu Dev. And he writes, since there is a global debate on universal basic income and max wealth cap, what would be the state response in this regard? In other words, Have you also thought about policy implications of your studies and conclusions?
Well, I mean, obviously, there is nothing better than to have SEC pay some attention to what we are talking about. To our knowledge, there has not been any study that has looked at sort of the real effects, that means managerial adjustments to this pay ratio disclosure. So we are definitely hoping that the SEC will pay some attention that, look, something that has happened is that they have used the discretion that you have allowed them to actually choose which method gives them the lowest pay ratio. So some of what you intended has been defeated by allowing them the discretion. So we do expect a lot of attention from SEC. We have not submitted the paper to SEC yet. We will after the paper has been submitted or maybe has gone through the first round. But SEC does know about our work in the sense that the paper is on SSRN, and we have heard from some people in the SEC, but we have not directly submitted to them, though we expect that, yes, there are serious policy implications of it. Hopefully, the best hope would be that, yes, SEC does make some adjustments or some restrictions on the choice of method that they allow.
Some minor suggestions from my side, because your results are very strong, at least in the first model, and quite robust to different measures. I think it's just about collecting some more data and tweaking some of the models. For example, like you mentioned that in the annual general meeting, the shareholders have some say in CEO, but restricting the analysis to social pressure in the headquarters state may sometimes not be capturing all the information. So how about including geographic dispersion of assets or operational hubs of a company as well? Because a lot of this pressure will come from internal employees, especially in larger companies. And that perhaps should be easy to operationalize. Secondly,
that is definitely a very valid observation that has come up. Also, I presented this paper about 3 weeks ago at IIM Calcutta, and the same question came up. And to make your argument even stronger, let me give you an example. And Walmart is an example in the sense that Walmart's headquarters is in Arkansas, which is not, in our measure, a highly pro-social state. However, Arkansas may be, their presence in Arkansas could be just the headquarters, which is what we will capture. Whereas they are all over the world and are facing all kinds of social pressure in India, in other states, in Mexico, as well as in other states. Are we capturing that? That is definitely a valid criticism. And at this point of time, we have not done that. But some of the proxies that you are suggesting that look at the distribution of their assets, distribution of their sales, and distribution of their workforce. Because your point that the workforce will have some say in how Walmart behaves. Amazon, as you know, is all over the world and also facing some social pressure in even states like Connecticut, where they were actually putting up an office. Then something happened in that particular town and they stopped it. So managerial decisions and corporate decisions do respond to social pressure. But I think that the criticism or the comment that the headquarters state may not capture it is definitely valid. Once again, we are hopeful that the paper does not get rejected because of that. I will tell you why I do not think that the paper will be rejected because of that. Because as you can understand that many companies are influenced a bit more by the state that they are operating in than the state, rather where they are headquartered and the states where they are operating, because the political pressure will possibly come from the state where they are headquartered rather than the states where they are operating. But your point with respect to employee pressure is definitely true.
And then another suggestion, because you have a huge sample, how about, because Hofstede has, Hofstede, I think, annually updates his list of national culture measures across the globe. And I'm sure, I mean, we all know Hofstede's models of cultural traits of individuals. I think he conducts an annual survey of people in a country. So how about taking a subsample of the firms which are more global in nature, and then include Hofstede's measures, maybe some kind of a principal component analysis as another very distinct measure of social values or personal traits, and then include that in a test as well.
Well, once again, remember the culture measure that you mentioned with respect to Hofstede's measure has been used widely in international markets. I mean,
so there's no novelty there.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm very, very familiar with that. In fact, I'm working on a paper where we are using that particular measure, and as you know that nowadays the measure is more in terms of the distance rather than their absolute value. We have not thought about that one, simply because, as I said, we are not sure to what extent, let's say, Walmart or their corporate policies will be influenced by what people in India are saying. We don't know that, in the sense that if there is too much pressure with respect to, you are, I mean, obviously the complaint about Walmart is that you are going to be destroying, like in Calcutta, for example, as you know, that I personally think that the whole city of Calcutta is nothing but a bazaar. Every single street, no matter where you live, you will see vendors in the morning. Many of them will be eliminated, but may not be, in the sense that people that live in Calcutta will possibly go to those street side shops, no matter whether Walmart is there or not. So that is the controversy. But, as a robustness check, can we control for the culture in the countries that these companies are operating in? Sure. Yes. Only thing that we do not know is to what extent is their corporate policy influenced by that. We don't know that.
So, Chinmoy, a lot of compliments are pouring in, and we are right on time. It was a very interesting presentation. You not only talked about the contents of the research, but those participants who are PhD students or future prospective researchers also got a lot of practical insights on the publication process and the attitude towards it. Thank you very much, Chinmoy. We were very privileged to host you here. We hope to bring you back very soon with another of your papers. And of course, Abhiman and I look forward to continue working with research projects.
Thank you very, very much. I appreciate it. I mean, I am Ahmedabad and Calcutta and Bangalore are the premier institutions in India. I am extremely proud and gratified to have this opportunity. Let me also tell you that those PhD students that are in attendance and those that are considering PhD program, if any of your students are interested in pursuing a PhD at UConn, please let me know. We are always looking for the best talent, and I cannot imagine better talent than what you have at your campus. So obviously, I will be very proud and happy if I can bring a student from India to UConn PhD program. We have some very solid junior faculty members that are hitting top journals tremendously over the last 7 or 8. I've been department head for 15 years, and our rankings in the Dallas list has gone up almost by 20 to 25 points. So I think we have a very strong department. And so if anybody is interested in pursuing PhD, just drop me an email and I will be very happy to talk to you and see if we can incorporate you or bring you here. Thank you, Prashant. I appreciate the opportunity. And Abhiman, thank you very much. Stay safe because the monster is still there and we all must look after each other. And thank you once more, and I look forward to more collaboration with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chinmoy. I also take this opportunity to thank Joydeep and Riddhi for being the champions for this webinar.
Thank you, Joydeep. And I hope that people could hear me clearly and could see the slides. I mean, I think that all the COVID hopefully will be gone. The online business that we are doing, a lot of it will stay.
Indeed, and thank you all the participants for your attention, wonderful questions. I need to remind you that our next webinar will be on 16 June at the same time. And our panelists from San Diego State University will be talking about mortgage securitization and liquidation of assets. See you soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good night and have a wonderful
Thank you. It has been a pleasure. Bye.
So have you stopped recording, Riddhi? Have you stopped recording?
Yes, yes.
Okay, this is dinner time now. Bon appetit. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jyoti.
Yes, sir. Welcome. Thank you. आपके सिस्टम पे कुछ आया है मैडम? अभी रिकॉर्डिंग हो रहा है कुछ?
रिकॉर्डिंग पोस्ट ऐसा आ रहा है सर।
हाँ, मैंने यहाँ से स्टॉप कर दिया रिकॉर्डिंग, ठीक है?
एक्चुअली मैंने रिकॉर्डिंग किया था बट बिटवीन नेटवर्क इशू की वजह से मैं मीटिंग से ही बाहर हो गई थी 5-10 मिनट के लिए, तो आई डोंट थिंक सो कि मेरा प्रॉपर होगा।
नहीं, वो तो रिकॉर्डिंग में कुछ इश्यू नहीं आएगा।
ओके ओके ओके।
ये पूरा है ना क्लाउड पे हुआ है रिकॉर्डिंग, तो क्लाउड से डाउनलोड करके आपको है ना वो निकुल जी या फिर मैं आपको दे दूंगा, ठीक है? उनसे बात करके कैसे डाउनलोड
सॉरी क्लाउड से डाउनलोड करके
ये पूरा रिकॉर्डिंग है ना क्लाउड पे हुआ है। एक्चुअली में हमको लोकल सिस्टम पे करना था, पर आपने मतलब रिकॉर्डिंग स्टार्ट किया होगा तो उस पे ऑप्शन आया होगा लोकल या क्लाउड, तो आपका गलती से क्लाउड टिक हो गया, तो अभी पूरा रिकॉर्डिंग क्लाउड पे है, जैसे अपना गूगल ड्राइव रहता है।
राइट।
तो वहां से डाउनलोड करके लोकल सिस्टम में फिर आपको दे देंगे, ठीक है ना?
ठीक है, आप मुझे कल तक पॉसिबल हो तो शेयर कर देना लिंक।
तो ऐसा हो तो कल आप एक बार कॉल कर लेना। अब्दुल जी हो गए कल, अब्दुल।
डेफिनेट